My name is Susan Baker. I am 29 years old, and I will never forget the morning when my life completely fell apart. My sister Michelle sent me a simple voice message. So I pressed play without thinking, expecting some harmless family gossip, but what I heard in those few seconds made me drop my phone and sit frozen on the edge of my bed. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because this story proves that sometimes the cruelest enemy lives under your own roof. After almost 10 years in New York, I never thought I'd be back in Savannah, Georgia, sleeping under the popcorn ceiling of my old room, the one with the peeling hydrangea wallpaper I picked at 12 and regretted at 13. My suitcases looked ridiculous on the faded carpet, New York stickers bragging about places I could no longer afford. On the top shelf of the closet, I found the cardboard boxes Mom had labeled in her careful handwriting: Susan, middle school, high school, diaries, art stuff. I slid one open, and there I was, gel pen confessions, ticket stubs, a stack of hand-drawn logos I once believed would change the world. The move home wasn't a decision. It was inevitability. Our agency had been gobbled by a holding company where no one knew our names, only our headcount. The email came at 6:12 p.m., subject line: Organizational changes. They kept it sterile, like surgery. Your role has been impacted. 40 applications later, I'd memorized the silence that follows: we'll be in touch. I refreshed job boards between temp shifts, ate cereal for dinner, and measured time in rejections. When my landlord increased the rent, I pretended I could negotiate with fate. But I couldn't. I sold my accent chair, canceled my gym membership, stretched one lipstick across 3 interviews, then called my parents and asked if the spare room was still a spare room. Savannah met me the way she always does, heavy with heat and jasmine. Dad picked me up from the airport in his pickup. He loaded my bags like they were lighter than the shame I kept trying to hide. Dad talked about the weather, the roof, how Mrs. Connolly 2 houses over was still feuding with the mailman. He didn't ask about New York. He didn't make me say out loud that something I loved had spat me out. At home, Mom had made chicken and dumplings and set my place with the chipped blue plate I always claimed as a kid. She hugged me too long at the door and then adjusted my ponytail like I was headed to 8th grade again. We'll make a plan, she said, which is how she comforts people: schedules, checklists, casseroles in the freezer. I smiled and said okay, even though plans had been what failed me most recently. That same summer, Michelle arrived. Of course she did. She swept in with 2 impeccably dressed kids and her professor husband, all sunscreen and matching duffels, their SUV gliding into our cracked driveway like it had been invited to a magazine shoot. She kissed Mom's cheek, handed Dad a bottle of expensive bourbon, and gave me a hug that was warm enough to look real in photos. She looked exactly as Instagram promised: hair glossy, nails pale pink, watch slim and gold. The kids said yes, ma'am, and stacked their shoes neatly by the door. Even their mess looked photogenic. Michelle's real estate firm in Florida had survived the market's mood swings. She talked about waterfront listings like they were people she admired. The view does the selling, she said, half joking, and Mom laughed the way she laughs when her pride catches in her throat. Michelle's husband, Peter, a professor of American literature, asked me about the city with gentle curiosity, the kind that doesn't press when it hears an echo. He listened while I recited the truth I'd sanded smooth for public use: acquisition, layoffs, the market being weird. He nodded like he knew something about chapters ending abruptly. Maybe he did. Back in my old room, nights stretched long and bright. I lay beneath the ceiling fan, reading my teenage scrawl by the light of a ceramic lamp shaped like a seashell. I found a list titled New York or Bust and laughed so softly it sounded like crying. In the mornings, I made coffee in Dad's dented percolator and sent out more resumes from the wobbly kitchen table. I drafted cover letters that tried to sound brave. But I avoided the mirror over the microwave because it had a way of returning my face to me without flattery. Mom instituted family dinners. She set out placemats, folded cloth napkins, lit a candle that smelled like clean cotton. Michelle told stories about clients who insisted on staging their pantries, about bidding wars and inspection loopholes. Peter-peppered conversation with campus anecdotes about first-year students who thought Gatsby was a person they could DM. Dad asked the kids about campcrafts and fishing, and occasionally turned to me with kind questions I struggled to answer. Any bites? He'd ask about jobs, and I'd joke about being excellent bait. On Saturdays, Michelle borrowed Mom's SUV to take the kids to the beach, and I stayed behind to clean my inbox and sweep the porch. Since kindergarten, people lined us up in their minds like a before and after photo. Michelle with the perfect bow in her hair, me with marker on my fingers. She smiled and teachers cooed. I asked for extra paper and they said, "Save some for the rest of the class, Susan." By middle school, the script had footnotes. Michelle ran for student council with glossy posters a parent designed. I hand-lettered mine at the kitchen table and smudged the ink with my wrist. She won, of course. After the assembly, she hugged me and whispered, "You're so creative," which sounded a lot like, "You're so close." At home, the comparisons were background music. Mom praised Michelle's posture, her discipline, her way with people. Dad admired her results, the clear, measurable things, trophies, scholarships, a row of framed certificates on the piano. And my results looked like drafts, a portfolio of ideas, prototypes of a future no one else could see. I learned to swallow the small sting of "you two are so different," as if it were a compliment. When I got my first job in New York, I thought the score finally narrowed. The offer letter felt like a passport stamp. I packed my sketchbooks and the good pens, sublet a room the size of a closet, and learned to love the grind of briefings at 8 a.m. and concept decks at midnight. I sent Michelle photos of billboards my team designed, tiny proofs I belonged to the skyline. She sent me selfies on boats and open houses with sunset views, proof she belonged to the life people wanted to buy. We liked each other's posts and left enthusiastic exclamation points, because that's what sisters do when they live in different time zones of approval. Back in Savannah, though, time reset to our family standard. At dinner parties, the conversation curved toward Michelle like iron to a magnet. Mom would pour iced tea and say, "Tell them about the Palm Beach listing." Then they'd turn to me with a sweetness. "Well," Mom would say, patting my arm, "maybe Susan will try her hand at something again someday." It was so gentle you could almost miss the bruise. I'd smile and stab a green bean. If I mentioned a freelance concept I was sketching, Michelle would murmur, "That's so cool," and take out her phone to show a staged pantry arranged by color. Sometimes jealousy arrived dressed as justice. Watching Mom rinse Michelle's wine glass while asking me to scrub the casserole dish, a part of me whispered, "Not fair." Then another part, trained by years of being reasonable, whispered back, "Don't be petty." And I learned to hold both voices. It wasn't that Michelle was cruel. She wasn't. She offered me her old blazer, the one with the razor-sharp lapels, and said, "This would look great in interviews." She forwarded a podcast about reinventing your brand. She told me I was talented, which is how people talk to artists when they don't hire them. But sometimes her kindness stung more than a slap would have. It implied a height difference we both pretended not to notice. It started on a Tuesday. Mom was stacking plates, Dad was tinkering with the back door latch, and I was at the kitchen table with my old MacBook open to a folder labeled Portfolio Final. Michelle drifted in with a glass of sparkling water, barefoot, the way she moves when she's about to just peek, and ends up rearranging the room. "What are you working on?" she asked, light voice, eyes focused on me. "Just cleaning up my files," I said, closing a tab too slowly. "Projects from the agency." "To show where?" She leaned against the counter like a talk show host. "Interviews? You should. People hire stories now." Michelle doesn't usually ask about my work unless she's in the mood to offer advice I didn't request. So when she pulled a chair beside me and said, "Can I see?" I felt a small muscle behind my ribs stiffen. I turned the screen anyway. I scrolled through case studies, a small bakery that doubled online orders with a geo-targeted video series, a neighborhood clinic's vaccination campaign that turned appointment slots into disappearing timers, a shoe brand's pop-up microsite where users customized laces in team colors and shared them to Instagram. Michelle nodded politely, the way people do at museum exhibits they're not qualified to critique. But when I opened the folder for Green Loop Interactive, something in her posture sharpened. "This one," she said. "What's this?" I hesitated. It was my favorite, a thesis-level love letter to the possibility that people could be nudged toward better habits without being shamed. An interactive campaign for eco-friendly brands, designed like a city you could wander through. Users earned footprint credits as they explored, a tap to swap a cleaning product for a refillable, a slider that showed energy savings when you chose LED, a map pin where a local shop offered discounts for bringing a tote. It gamified change without confetti cannons, rewarded small shifts with real coupons, layered neighborhood pride on top of personal choices. We tested it in one borough and watched repeat visits climb like ivy. Michelle sat closer, shoulder touching mine. Show me the flow? I flipped through the prototype, the opening animation, a line drawing of a street that colored itself in as you picked actions, the profile screen where people set goals, meatless Mondays, bike twice a week, the leaderboard by zip code. Michelle opened her notes app and started typing. She never takes notes on my ideas. And seeing her write made my stomach dip. What did you use for the neighborhood ranking? She asked, thumb moving quick. Like, did you cross-reference store partners with zip data or census data for baselines, partners for incentives? I replied. We kept the scoring transparent so it felt fair. Smart. She tucked hair behind her ear and kept going. And brands paid to be inside this city? Placement fees, plus a performance kicker if their codes were redeemed. Small businesses got a discount tier. We called it a circular ad economy, spending that loops back into the block. She smiled. Catchy. She typed the exact phrase. I watched the reflection of the screen in the glossy surface of her phone. Notes piled up like I was giving a lecture. She asked about the engagement curve, about the lag time between sign-up and first action, about how we translated boring sustainability tips into taps that felt intuitive. When I mentioned the tone, never scolding, always local, she nodded like she'd discovered a secret door. From the sink, Mom said, show your sister the coffee brand video, Susie. I love that one. I clicked it obediently. Warm hands, steam, subtitles about fair wages. Michelle barely glanced. She kept circling back to Green Loop, eyes narrowing at the map, the badge system, the modular partners panel where you could add a bike shop in seconds. How did you pitch it? She asked. Like the narrative. Neighborhoods as living dashboards, I said, hearing my old deck voice. People want to see their choices add up. We gave them a place where it did. Right. More typing. Would it translate to other verticals? It's a framework, not a product, I said carefully. So yes. Her phone chimed. She ignored it. Can you send me this deck? She asked, too casual. I hesitated. Because it was mine in a way none of the others were. I can show you more now, I offered, stalling. But I need to clean up the files before I share. Makes sense, she said, friendly. No rush. She stared at the opening animation again, longer than made sense for someone who supposedly sells square footage and views. She zoomed into the badge shaped like a leaf layered over a house. This is cute, she said, screenshotting it. Inspiration. Something in me cooled. Michelle screenshots hotels, sofas, dresses. Not my work. I swallowed and tried to sound neutral. It's more than cute. I know, she said quickly as if she'd stepped on my foot. I know. She set the phone face down, then flipped it back over and took one more note. The kids wandered in and asked for popsicles. Dad tested the door latch and said it would hold another summer. Mom wiped the counter and declared, no phones at the table. Michelle locked her screen and smiled at me like a co-conspirator. This is really good, Susie, she said, soft. I'm impressed. It should have felt like a medal. Instead, it felt like a draft of cold air under a closed door. I nodded, pretended to accept the compliment, and closed the laptop. That night, lying under the fan, I replayed the way she'd asked questions, targeted, almost technical, skipping the fluff she usually loves. Michelle knows how to sell a kitchen island. She doesn't usually ask about engagement curves. So I told myself I was being paranoid. A week later, when the heat lay heavy over Savannah and the cicadas sounded like an overloaded power line, I got a message that jolted me upright on the porch swing. It was from Stephen White, Stephen with the unruly curls who used to pull all-nighters with me in the campus design lab, who once stapled his sleeve to a foam board at 3 a.m. and presented anyway. We hadn't spoken in years beyond the occasional heart on Instagram. His text was quick and unromantic, the way real chances often are. Hey Susan. I'm at Halcyon and Company in Atlanta now. We're opening a role, creative director, digital strategies. Your name came to mind. Interested? I reread it 3 times. Creative director, digital strategies. Words that sounded like the hallway I'd always been walking toward. I typed yes. Tell me everything, then deleted everything and replaced it with more, because I didn't want to look desperate even to an old friend who had seen me cry over a kerning critique. He called within the hour. Atlanta hum filled the line, traffic, laughter, the specific echo of a big office hallway. Stephen talked fast. Halcyon had grown, won a handful of national accounts, and was building a dedicated digital group. They needed someone who could speak, platform, and people, who understood behavior and brand, who could turn clicks into change, not just charts. That interactive sustainability thing you did in New York, he said, I still think about it. Our clients want that kind of thinking. Interview this Friday. Portfolio first, then a panel, then a walkthrough with the managing partner who cares about the why. He said the salary range before I asked, and it made my breath catch in a good way for once. After we hung up, I sat with my phone face down, palms flat on my thighs like I was studying a small boat. I didn't want to tell anyone yet, not because I was superstitious, but because the idea felt bright and soft. I opened my laptop and built a new deck with quiet hands, opened with the neighborhoods as dashboards concept, then 3 campaigns that proved I could move crowds without shouting, then a slide called Principles, where I wrote in plain language the things I'd learned the hard way. I told myself I would share the news at dinner, when everyone was sitting and no one could accidentally make it smaller by walking out of the room. Mom had made meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans that squeaked between your teeth. Dad set the table and whistled under his breath. Michelle breezed in late with a sun hat and a string bag of lemons, kissed Mom, kissed the kids, kissed the air by my cheek. I waited until the plates were full and then said, I got a message from a college friend. There's an opening for a creative director of digital strategies at a big agency in Atlanta. I have an interview Friday. Mom's fork hovered midair, gravy dripping back onto the potatoes in a slow brown thread. Michelle took a sip of water and looked at Peter before looking at me, as if the reaction needed alignment. Dad smiled first, small and real. That sounds promising, kiddo. Mom put her fork down and reached for her napkin like she was wiping away a spill. Sweetheart, she said gently, that sounds big. But maybe too stressful a job for you right now. She softened the words with a pat on my wrist. You've been through so much. Maybe something part-time to ease back in. I felt the pat like a stamp. Michelle tilted her head, all empathy and edge. Atlanta, she said, a laugh in the word. But that's not New York. Are you really that desperate? The kids went quiet like they'd just learned a new grown-up rule. Peter cleared his throat, to his credit. Atlanta has a serious creative scene. Emory, tech, film studios. It's not a downgrade. Michelle smiled at him without looking. I know, babe. I just mean, Atlanta isn't her dream. She turned to me. Is it? I breathed in, tasted metal. My dream, I said carefully, is to do the work I'm good at with people who see it. Geography is just the container. Dad stabbed a green bean and said, container's a good word for it. He smiled at me again, like he knew a ship in me had lifted anchor. Mom recovered into logistics. Where would you live? How would you commute? We can't help as much if you're not here. And the market is unpredictable. What if she didn't say lay you off, but the shadow of the phrase stretched across the tablecloth? I can sublet a place for a few months, I said. Stephen will share the recruiter's packet. It's real. Stephen? Michelle repeated. From college? The one who wore corduroy in May. She grinned, charming by habit. He was sweet. He's good, I said, and let the words stand. Dinner reorganized itself into other subjects, but the air stayed weird. After we cleared the dishes, Mom followed me into the kitchen with a dish towel and a voice I know too well. I just don't want you to get hurt again, she said, rinsing a plate in slow circles. You build yourself up, and then when things change, you fall so far. I don't fall, I said quietly. I just land and stand back up. She looked at me, eyes shiny. Just be careful, okay? Upstairs, I put the finishing touches on the deck and printed a hard copy. I packed my leather folder, the one I bought with my first New York paycheck, and laid out a navy dress that didn't apologize for itself. I set an early alarm and then didn't sleep, not out of dread, but because my mind was busy assembling a different life at high speed. The very next morning, the house began to hum with small accidents, each one minor enough to look innocent. At 9:58 a.m., 2 minutes before my prep call with Steven's team, the Wi-Fi flickered and died. The little green light on the router went to sleep as if it, too, had decided I needed rest. I crawled under Dad's desk, unplugged, replugged, counted to 60 like a child wishing on a candle. Nothing. Michelle leaned against the door frame, cradling her coffee, phone in her other hand. Ugh, Spectrum again, she sighed, sympathetic as a hostess at a crowded restaurant. We've been having issues all week. But I had used the internet just fine all week. She bit her lip, offered me her hotspot, and then remembered she had to take the kids to the park. Maybe rain check? She smiled. I called Steven from the porch and apologized. We rescheduled. By lunch, the Wi-Fi resurrected itself without explanation. That became the rhythm, fully alive until the calendar held anything that looked like a step forward, then suddenly faint. A second prep call, down again. A recruiter screening, connected without internet. Dad wiggled wires and said it was probably the heat. I wanted to believe the heat did that, the same way humidity unpeels wallpaper, slow and inevitable. But humidity doesn't switch off at 10 o'clock and back on at 11:07. When I booked mock interviews with a career coach over Zoom, Michelle announced, brightly, that we should all drive to Tybee that afternoon because the tide charts were perfect. It's such a waste to sit inside on a day like this, she said, already filling a tote with sunscreen and snacks. I said I had a session scheduled. Oh, reschedule, she chirped. Family time is therapy. Mom backed her up with the force of tradition. You can talk to them anytime. The kids will remember this. And the kids cheered on cue. I stayed home and did the session, but even then the doorbell rang 3 times, packages for neighbors, and the blender roared for smoothies, and the lawn crew arrived an hour early with leaf blowers that sounded like small jet engines. Other days it was subtler. When Steven asked for a half-hour chemistry chat with the managing partner, Michelle offered to take me for a treat beforehand, nails, a little polish, a touch-up for confidence. I said I'd love to. Could we go the next day? She booked it for that day anyway, 2 blocks from a street festival. I didn't realize traffic would be insane, she said, looping the neighborhood while the clock sneered. I watched the minutes shrink on my phone. We screeched into the driveway with 4 minutes to spare, my stomach in my throat, my nails still soft under the topcoat. I balanced the laptop on a towel to keep polish off Mom's table and smiled into the camera like I hadn't just sprinted. Then there were the comments. Small jokes with an appetite. At dinner one evening, as Mom passed the cornbread and the kids negotiated peas, Michelle looked straight at me and said, "You know, it's funny how movies love to show a heroine who returns to her hometown after failing in the big city. Sounds familiar, right?" Her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind you need a glass of water after. Laughter spilled around the table, automatic and performative. Everyone laughed, except for Dad. He kept his eyes on his plate and cut his pork chop into precise pieces, the way he does when he's choosing silence over war. I felt the heat rise up my neck to my ears. I took a breath and said nothing. And Michelle took my quiet as permission, which is what bullies always do. I mean, they always give her a quirky job, she continued lightly. Baking cupcakes or arranging flowers. It's cute. Peter glanced at me, then at his water, then at the kids, and said, too loudly, "So, the Braves are doing well." The conversation lurched down another road, but the joke kept pulsing under the table. I tried to attribute it all to chaos. Families are messy. Kids spill and schedules collide and routers live fickle lives. But then one afternoon I sat on the porch swing with my laptop open, hotspot on, headphones in, rehearsing answers to behavioral questions, and Michelle settled beside me with her phone. "They're going to grill you on leadership," she said, scrolling. "Tell them you manage, ideation." She said the last word like it was a fruit she didn't quite like. I told her I had it covered. She smiled. "Of course you do." One night, after everyone went to bed, I reset the router and changed the admin password, then wrote the new one on a sticky note for Dad and slid it under his toolbox. I bought a portable hotspot with my dwindling savings and hid it in a shoebox. The morning before my big interview began like any other anxious countdown: coffee too strong, hands too shaky, dress hanging from the closet door like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, scrolling through my portfolio slides for the 1,000th time, when my phone buzzed. A new notification. A voice message. From Michelle. I actually smiled. Maybe the ice had thawed, maybe the petty jokes were just nerves. I imagined her saying, "Go crush it," in that bright, easy tone she used with clients. I put in my earbuds, tapped to play, and braced for sisterly encouragement. But what came through the speakers turned my blood to ice. "Mom, I talked to someone from the agency in Atlanta. I told them that Susan is unreliable and often doesn't finish projects. Have them double-check her references. We can't let her try to compete with me again. By the way, remember her university thesis project, eco-friendly brand promotion? I used it in my campaign in Florida. That's why my sales skyrocketed. She'll never know." I stopped breathing. The room blurred. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard, that it was some sick, accidental collage of words. I replayed it. Her voice stayed smooth, practical, almost bored. No catch, no apology. Just strategy. She hadn't meant it for me. The name at the top of the thread, Mom, glowed like a bad joke. She'd hit the wrong contact. My own sister, scheduling my failure as if it were a dentist appointment. And my mother, receiving it like an errand. I pulled the phone from my ear and stared at the screen as if it could give me different news. Then I pressed play again, earbuds back in, because denial wants proof. Same words. Same tone. I heard every syllable this time. Unreliable. Double check. Can't let her compete. She'll never know. My hands went cold. I pressed my palm against my thigh until I felt something solid. I saved the message. I downloaded it. I opened the Files app and saved it again. I forwarded it to my own email, to a folder named Records. I thought about the accidental Wi-Fi outages, the family outings layered over interviews, the comment at dinner about failed heroines. She hadn't been careless, she'd been methodical. And Mom had known. Not just laughed at a joke or minimized a bruise, known. A noise in the hallway made me yank the earbuds out. I held still. Nothing. The house exhaled and settled. I checked the timestamp on the message. Sent minutes ago. Michelle was somewhere in this house, moving through the morning, confident the universe would keep rewarding her audacity. I pictured her at the kitchen island, sipping sparkling water, thumbs flying across her phone, setting other people's outcomes with a sentence. I didn't text back. I didn't run to confront her. I didn't run to Mom, either. The message told me exactly which team she was on. I did the most decisive thing I could manage. I put my phone in airplane mode, then turned it off and set it in the drawer of my nightstand. I stood and smoothed the dress hanging from the closet door. I needed to get ready. My interview was still my interview. The world had tilted, but the clock hadn't stopped. I walked to the mirror and studied my face, eyes a little red, jaw set. I thought of Dad's quiet, of the way he hadn't laughed at the failed heroine joke. A pulse of gratitude moved through me. Not everyone was lost to the performance. From downstairs came the clatter of breakfast, spoons on bowls, Michelle's laugh, Mom's low hum. For the first time since moving back, those sounds didn't make me feel like I was being folded into family. I picked up my leather folder. I picked up my phone. And looked at the screen one last time, at the file name I had given the message, Michelle Confession. Then I walked out into the bright, hot morning, the air thick with jasmine and shock, and told myself the two most important truths I had in that moment. She did this. But I am still going. The day of the interview in Atlanta, I felt like I was walking on glass. My hands trembled as I buttoned my blazer, my mind still replaying Michelle's voice over and over again. That message had carved itself into my chest, leaving behind nothing but raw nerves and the kind of fury that made sleep impossible. Still, I told myself, you cannot let her take this away too. The drive into Atlanta felt endless. By the time I reached the sleek glass building where the agency was located, my pulse was hammering so loudly I thought the receptionist must hear it. Inside, the lobby gleamed with chrome accents and white leather chairs. Screens looped ads for brands I had studied in college, campaigns I had admired from afar. And here I was, about to face the people who could either hand me the future I'd been clawing toward or close the door for good. When the manager, a poised woman named Patricia, ushered me into the conference room, I forced a smile. "Susan, thank you for coming," she said warmly. I spread out my portfolio across the polished table, each page a reminder of late nights in New York, of stubborn determination to make something meaningful out of pixels and words. As I presented, I poured everything into my words, not just strategies, but conviction. I showed them the interactive eco-friendly campaign, the viral brand activations, the creative briefs that had once excited entire teams. My throat tightened when I spoke of vision, campaigns that didn't just sell but connected, that made people believe they were part of something bigger. For a moment, I forgot Michelle. I forgot the betrayal. There was only me, my work, and the burning need to prove myself. Patricia leaned back in her chair, flipping through the pages. The other panelists exchanged glances that I couldn't quite read. I braced for polite rejection, the kind I'd heard 40 times before. But then Patricia tilted her head and said, almost casually, "By the way, we did receive a strange call about you." The air froze. My lungs seized. This is it, I thought. But Patricia's next words were nothing like what I expected. Funny thing is, she continued with a small smile, when someone goes out of their way to sling mud, it says more about the caller than the candidate. If anything, it made us more curious about you. My heart thudded. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside, relief and disbelief collided so hard I almost laughed. Michelle's sabotage hadn't buried me, it had exposed her pettiness instead. Patricia tapped a finger against my portfolio. "Your work speaks for itself. We'll be in touch soon." That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling, unable to process what had happened. The voice message still stung like an open wound, but for the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope. A week later, the email arrived. I must have read it 10 times before it sank in. "We are pleased to offer you the position of Director of Digital Campaigns. Compensation package, $165,000 annually, plus benefits. Welcome to the team." The number glowed on the screen, higher than any salary I had ever earned in New York. My chest ached with joy and disbelief. After all the failures, all the sabotage, all the dinners where I was dismissed as the disappointment, here it was. My chance. I locked myself in the bathroom before telling anyone, afraid my voice would shake too much. I pressed the phone to my ear, called Steven, and whispered I got it. His cheer burst through the line. For a moment, I allowed myself to cry, not tears of despair, but of something sharper, fiercer. This was not just a job. It was the first brick in building a life where Michelle's shadow no longer determined who I was allowed to be. And for the first time in a long while, I couldn't wait for tomorrow. I signed the lease on a one-bedroom in Midtown Atlanta with floors that creaked and a view of the MARTA tracks. The place smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I bought a thrifted couch, a cheap coffee table, and a set of white dishes that made breakfast feel like a restart. Work filled my days, new team, new logins, new acronyms to learn. I kept the voice message saved in 3 places like a talisman I hated. The part of me that had spent years smoothing family edges still tried to negotiate. Maybe it was a one-off. Maybe Michelle had exaggerated. Maybe Mom didn't really know, not the way knowing matters. But the other part of me, the one that had slept on ideas in studio chairs and taught itself to fight for credit, wanted receipts. I needed what my new creative director called defensible truth. The opportunity arrived on a humid Saturday when the group text lit up with photos from a historic home tour. Mom had been planning it for weeks, complete with a picnic on the square. All day out, she wrote, the exclamation points bright and oblivious. Michelle posted a boomerang of the kids jumping over a blanket. Dad added a photo of a pecan tree he thought looked like the one in our yard. I stared at the thread for a full minute. Then I picked up my keys. The house felt the way it always does when no one is there, cooler, dimmer, full of objects reverting to their actual temperature. I let myself in and stood for a second in the foyer, listening. The clock in the living room ticked with exaggerated importance. In the kitchen, sunlight fell in white rectangles across the table. I washed my hands, not for hygiene but for ritual, and walked down the hall to Michelle's room, the same one she'd claimed as a teenager, now updated with adult polish. I sat in her chair, felt the small ownership it gives, and lifted the lid. The screen woke up to a photo of her children at the beach. For a long, flickering moment, I considered the ethical math. Then I entered the password I'd watched her type 100 times. She never changed it. Michelle trusted her systems to protect her. Her desktop was aggressively clean. But on the dock was a blue folder icon titled Speeches. It sounded harmless, like notes for networking breakfasts. But inside, subfolders named for cities and dates, an archive of panels and keynotes. I clicked one at random. Slides about neighborhood-driven marketing, a phrase that made my scalp tighten. Slide 2. A schematic of a city street that colored itself in as choices were selected. The animation wasn't mine, but the bones were. My senior thesis had been the skeleton key. Michelle had cut it to fit her lock. I opened Speeches, Palm Coast. There it was, a slide titled Circular Ad Economy, the words exact, the diagram almost identical to the one I'd drawn with a green pen and a trembling hand. In the notes window, she'd added bullets about badge psychology, zip code pride, and shop perk loops. I felt both nauseated and eerily calm, like my body couldn't decide which defense to deploy. I took screenshots, then exported the deck to PDF and emailed it to a new address I'd set up the night before, one no one knew. I kept going. A folder called Inspo was stuffed with screenshots, my prototypes, my sketch thumbnails, even a photo of my hand-drawn leaf badge I'd posted once on a private portfolio site that only friends used. Next to it, Michelle had typed, "Make this cleaner, silver or emerald palette." Tied to local giveaways. I felt a sudden flash of something ugly, almost pity. How long had she been building herself out of pieces of me? Then I found a different folder, one with a name that did not pretend, Client's Back Channel. The hair on my arms lifted before I even clicked. Inside were emails saved as PDFs for reference to brokers, to PR contacts, and, with a cold jolt, to my old agency in New York. One file was labeled Org Feedback, Susan V. I opened it and felt the room tip. "Hi, Robert," it began, casual, cordial. "I'm reaching out as an industry contact and sister to Susan Baker. Off the record, she is unreliable with deadlines and tends to overpromise. For your own sake, please verify her deliverables before final decisions in the reorg. I say this as family who has tried to support her. Michelle." My vision tunneled. I scrolled. Another, sent weeks later. "Given the coming layoffs, if you have to make difficult choices, please don't keep Susan out of obligation. It won't help her growth." Attached was a photo of us at Thanksgiving, the kind that makes us look close enough to believe. Below the chain, Robert had replied with the flattened politeness of corporate men, "Appreciate the candor." I didn't realize I was standing until the chair scraped back. I pressed my palms to the desk to steady myself. The betrayal I had tried to name suddenly had a letterhead. I forwarded the emails to my account and then to a second one, labeled in a way only I would decode. I zipped the Speeches folder and emailed that too. I found calendar invites to webinars she'd given where my thesis lived behind her voice. I grabbed browser history, partner lists, anything that tied her profit to my ideas and her words to my loss. Before I closed the laptop, I took one last look at the beach photo. Her kids squinted into late light, hair blown across their foreheads. For their sake, I thought, do this cleanly. On the way out, I paused at the hall mirror and studied my face, flushed and intent. I didn't tell Dad over the phone. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't text Michelle a single word. I booked a table for 4 at a cafe downtown where the windows catch the river light and the coffee is strong enough to keep the world from wobbling. I sent a group message. Can we meet tomorrow at 2? I have something important to discuss. Dad replied within a minute, of course. Mom sent a thumbs up. Michelle liked the message and added a heart. I got there early and chose a corner table, back to the wall, the way people do when they need to see what's coming. I ordered water I didn't drink. I rehearsed a dozen openings and rejected them all. When they walked in, Dad in his golf shirt, Mom in a cardigan despite the heat, Michelle from a haircut with blowout perfect ends, I stood and felt a steadiness I had not felt since I was 21 and believed my name could carry me. Thanks for coming, I said. No preamble. I set my phone on the table and slid one earbud across to Dad. I need you to listen to something. He frowned, confused, but took it. I pressed play. Michelle's voice filled the space between us, tinny and clear. Mom's eyes flicked to the barista, to the window, to me. Dad's mouth thinned. The words rolled out exactly as I'd memorized them. Unreliable, double check, can't let her compete. Used her thesis, sales skyrocketed, she'll never know. When it ended, no one moved. The cafe clinked and murmured around our small, silent square. Dad took the earbud out like it burned. His face had gone the color of paper. For a second, I thought he might stand up and leave, or explode, or both. He looked at Michelle. Then at me. Is this real? He asked, though he knew. Yes, I said. My voice surprised me, level, almost gentle. I have the file. I have more. Michelle recovered first, like she always does, reaching for charm the way other people reach for napkins. Susie, she began, soft, that was out of context. You know how Mom and I talk when we're stressed. Stop. Dad said, not loudly, but with a weight that made her mouth close. He turned to Mom. Did you know? His voice went flat on the last word. Mom's fingers tightened around her mug. She stared at the coffee as if it could offer an answer and said nothing. The silence was an answer. I pulled my leather folder onto the table and slid out printed pages. I never print things, but paper mattered now. These are the decks, I said. My thesis, my prototype, her notes added on top. And these, I tapped a small stack. Emails to Robert in New York. Dad reached for the emails first. He read faster than I expected, jaw working. I watched the shape of the words land in him, watched the way men taught to fix things confront something that couldn't be repaired with pliers. He looked older when he finished. Not frail, just finally human. Michelle tried again, this time with tears nudged to the surface. I did it for you, she said to Dad, as if loyalty could be retrofitted. Susan was miserable in New York, you know she was. I was protecting her from a job? I asked. From rent? From my life. From failure, she snapped, the mask slipping. I let the line hang. It was because of you that I was laid off, I said quietly. I have proof. Mom finally lifted her eyes. She didn't reach for me. She didn't reach for Michelle. She looked at Dad with the weary resignation of someone who has held a door shut for a long time and felt the hinge give. I told her not to call Robert, she said, barely above a whisper. I told her not to use your schoolwork. But I didn't stop her. She looked down again, as if looking up had cost her. Dad rubbed his forehead, then the back of his neck, an old gesture of defeat. Michelle, he said, how far did you go? Michelle looked at the window, at her reflection more than the street. Far enough, she said, and then, smaller, I didn't think she'd ever find out. I slid my phone closer, the file name visible on the screen. I found out. No one touched the coffee. The cafe's playlist shifted to something upbeat that felt absurd against the table's gravity. A couple by the door laughed about a dog video. The world continued being itself, undisturbed by the fact that mine had tilted on a hinge and found a new angle. I wanted you to hear it from me, I told Dad. Not later. Not through someone else's version. I wanted you to see what's been happening. How the jokes weren't jokes. How the outages weren't accidents. How the line between family and theft got crossed and then erased. Dad nodded once, like the body does when the brain is too full for words. He looked at Michelle with something like astonishment. How had he missed this in a daughter he thought he knew? He looked at Mom with something like grief. "We're going to make this right," he said finally, to me, and then, to Michelle, "You are going to make this right." Michelle did not answer. Her hands were folded in front of her in a careful cathedral. She stared at the grain of the table as if it might rearrange itself into absolution. Mom tucked hair behind her ear, a small, nervous habit I'd inherited without wanting. No one reached for anyone. I gathered the papers back into my folder, slid the phone into my bag, and stood. "I have another meeting," I lied, because I needed the exit to be mine. "You can keep those copies," I told Dad. "There's more if you need it." When I stepped outside, the heat rose off the pavement and wrapped around me like a warning. Behind me, through the glass, I saw my father's head bowed over the emails, my mother's eyes downcast, my sister's face turned to the window, searching for herself. I didn't wait to see who spoke first. I had the only thing I came for, the truth, printed and played, finally louder than the family story. 6 months folded themselves into a new kind of ordinary. The calendar no longer felt like a ledger of rejections, it looked like a roadmap. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment 2 blocks from the office, a place with a tiny balcony that fit exactly 1 chair and enough herbs to make me feel domestic. I learned the names of the baristas at the coffee shop on Peachtree and the sound each of my teammates made when they solved something hard. I learned how to delegate without sounding like I was giving up, how to praise people publicly and critique privately. Work became a different kind of refuge. As director of digital campaigns, I was responsible for a slate of projects that used to make me giddy and queasy in equal measure. We were launching a regional initiative that stitched together 5 metropolitan brands into a single, local-first experience: shopping districts, transit partners, micro-incentives for sustainable choices, neighborhood leaderboards. The Green Loop idea, my old thesis skeleton with smarter bones, found a home in one of the modules. I retooled it, stripped away the parts that were sentimental and kept the parts that actually moved people. The team built it fast and clean, and when the beta rolled out, we watched engagement climb day by day like a plant unfurling leaves. My inbox filled with notes from creative strategists, data scientists, and a product manager named Raj who began signing his emails with a tiny coffee cup emoji. Raj became one of the friends I never expected to have in a new city, blunt, funny, and the kind of person who sent playlists when deadlines got loud. Atlanta itself felt less like an obstacle now and more like a network of tiny belonging places. After work, we tested late-night taco trucks for our local-first activations. On weekends, the team met for a Saturday marathon of guerrilla poster installations and then drank beers as if the work had meant nothing and everything at the same time. I started going to a yoga class on Wednesday evenings with a woman named Lena who told me about her childhood in Savannah and made me laugh about the ridiculousness of corporate branding over green juice. These were small things, coffee orders learned, a joke that landed, but they added up to a life that felt like mine. Meanwhile, news about Michelle filtered down in the way gossip always finds a seam: client whispers, a forwarded memo, a text from someone who had once listened to her keynote. Complaints had been filed. Clients were unhappy with promises that had the sheen of exclusivity, but the skeleton of someone else's work. An internal audit at her agency began after multiple customers questioned timelines and source credits. I learned, through a bruised professional courtesy of people who worked in the industry, that a few of the decks she'd used to sell Florida listings resembled my old projects in both shape and phrasing. I did not gloat. Verification felt less like victory than the administration of justice, boring, necessary, and oddly antiseptic. More painfully immediate were the changes in her personal life. Rumors became documents, an investigation notice, then a formal letter, then news that she and Peter had separated. He filed for divorce, according to a short note that appeared in a community feed I didn't follow, but which someone thought I should see. The legal filings cited irreconcilable differences, which is a polite phrase for the truth that sometimes people leave when they realize their moral architecture will not hold. I heard, too, about clients who were retracting endorsements and colleagues who were distancing themselves. I felt an odd, complicated split, relief that the harm I'd endured had been noticed, empathy for the children who would be collateral in the fallout, and a slow, steady loosening of the old knot of sibling rivalry that had strangled so many small gestures. Then, on a slow Tuesday evening, an envelope appeared in my work mailbox. No return address. My name, typed, looked small in the rectangle of white. I sat at my desk with the hum of the open office around me and turned it over once, twice before I slid it open with my thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters, a small apology wrapped in something I had not expected. This is not an apology. It began in Michelle's handwriting, which looked less practiced than it had in photos, human, impatient. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I confess to the Realtors Association that I used your ideas. Now everyone knows the truth. I'm tired of living a lie. There was no flourish, no plea, no explanation of motive beyond the tiredness of being someone she had become. I closed my laptop and sat very still. In the months since the voice message and the cafe meeting and the files I'd found, I had rehearsed variations of revenge in my head, public callouts, legal pressure, media storms. I had imagined humiliating Michelle in replayed looped clips on social feeds, making the betrayal as visible as it had been to me in private. But the letter was not a confession offered for spectacle. It was a confession offered because someone finally had the courage to stop pretending. I thought of the kids, the way they would be used as sad punctuation in a family drama if things escalated, and of Peter, who had always been the gentle type in family photos, losing more than he bargained for. I stood up and walked to the kitchen in my small apartment. The city lights glittered beyond the balcony, and for a second the sound of traffic felt like applause and not something to drown tears in. I made coffee, though it was late habit, consolation, ceremony, and sat back down. I did not want to ruin Michelle's career or dismantle what was left of her family. I wanted my work back. I wanted the years of being minimized to be recognized as the theft they were, and then closed like a ledger. So I folded the letter and slid it into the same folder I kept for contracts and offers. I won't deny there was a small, satisfying lift, call it reclamation, when the campaign we'd launched hit its stride and clients wrote personal emails that said things like "You and your team changed our neighborhood for the better." But the real prize was quieter. The ability to sleep without checking the tone of family messages, the freedom to show up at work without rehearsing apologies for being ambitious. The easy laughter with colleagues who knew how hard the road to an honest opportunity could be. I poured the last of the coffee down the sink, put the mug in the rack, and turned off the kitchen light. The balcony chair was empty. The city buzzed on. I sat for a beat in the dark, thinking of how fragile the line between family and self can be, and how necessary it is to cross it when love stops being honest. Then I walked to my bedroom and went to sleep with the kind of calm I used to only pretend to have. Looking back at everything that had happened, I finally understood one simple truth. If you let others define your worth, even if they're your closest relatives, you risk losing yourself. Michelle's betrayal cut me deeply, not just because she stole my work, but because she proved that envy can blind even the people who should protect you. It took me years to see that respect must begin with yourself. I spent so much of my life waiting for my parents' approval, measuring my value against my sister's achievements, and bending myself into the lesser role they had quietly assigned me. But in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was that I stood up, proved myself, and reclaimed the life I wanted. And Michelle, her downfall was her own doing. I didn't have to destroy her. The truth did it for me. Do I forgive her? Maybe not. But I no longer wake up with anger burning in my chest. I wake up proud of who I am, proud that I had the courage to keep going when everything seemed lost. And now, I want to turn this question to you. Have you ever discovered a truth that shattered your vision of your family? If so, how did you handle it? Share your own story in the comments below. I'd love to read about your experiences. And if my story resonated with you, hit the like and subscribe buttons because trust me, there are more shocking stories ahead, and sometimes the truth hidden inside a family can be scarier than any lie.